All right. So let me give you a quick introduction to DevOps. So since this is our first class and I see some new faces also here, so I'm going to give you a quick overview on DevOps. So let me quickly introduce SDLC. So how many of you have heard this word, SDLC, Software Development Lifecycle? Basic idea in your engineering, or if you have attended any other training programs where you learned any language, Java, Python. So this is a very, very important thing. So this basically gives you an overview of the project implementation. So how you get the requirement and what are the next steps to take your idea to production. So typically you have a customer who comes with some requirement, okay, and then once you get the requirement, you will start analyzing that requirement. So what this guy is talking about. So he usually comes up, your customer usually comes with an idea. So that has to be converted as a product, right? So you will first try to analyze that. So you will try to understand what he is trying to do. What is that business is concentrating in. And then we'll have to go through a lot of things like, okay, we have to pick a language to develop the application. So we have different options like Java, .NET. You can develop the applications in any language, right? So it depends on sometimes the customer preference, or sometimes if you know Java, you might want to start in Java because you don't want to learn any other language again to develop the application. So based on the preference and sometimes, depending on the application, some languages are suitable to develop certain applications, certain type of applications. So based on that, we will pick some language. Similarly, we want to use some database. So nowadays we have again different options like MySQL database, Oracle database when it comes to SQL. Similarly, we have also NoSQL database servers like MongoDB, CouchDB, etc. So we pick all these options. Okay, which language are we going to develop? Which database are we going to use? Which framework, if we have to use any framework? Again, which framework are we going to use? Okay, and finally, where should we run the application? Okay, so I think that is where we have seen AWS. So where we can host our applications. So once we have the application developed, we can actually use AWS or Azure, any public clouds, to host and run your applications, so that you can make it public. So all your customers will be able to access the application, right? So you will go through all these requirement analysis first, and then the development will be started, where the developer will be starting code to make that functionality available for the customers, right? And once the code is developed, the code is usually pushed to the next phase. So typically you have a QA team who will build the code, and then who will also test the code, and then they also release the code to productions, QA, and it goes to different environments. First it goes to QA environment, and then from there it goes to pre-production, and then it goes to production environment. Finally, that is delivered to the customers. And once the first version is running in the production environment as expected, so your cycle closes there, and then your customer again comes with some enhancements or bug fixes. Okay, again you will start looking at the requirement. So what is the additional functionality that we want to add? So again the requirement analysis phase will start. So it is actually a continuous process depending on the customer's requirement. He'll always come with some new ideas. Either it could be an enhancement, or it could be a bug fix, or it could be some new application. Okay, so he'll come with an idea. So you have to understand, analyze what is required to develop that application, and then start development, then build it, test it, release it. So this is called software development lifecycle. Okay, so if you look at this, mainly there are three teams involved in this whole process. Developers who develop the code, and they do basic unit testing. So whenever they develop the code, they'll make sure it is working in their local environment. If it is working, then they will move the code to version control, and from there you have a QA team, testing team. Okay, so who will be responsible for building the code? So when I say building, how many of you know what is the difference between a compiled language and interpreted language? Anybody from programming background? So Java, Python, shell scripting. Okay. So there are two types of languages. One is compiled and another one is interpreted languages. Okay. So when you look at compiled languages, first you write the code, and then you have to compile the code to generate the binary files. Have you ever written C programs in engineering? So where you write the code and then you say CC and then give the .c file, and you get .a.out, and you execute that A.out file to see the result. So you cannot directly run the program to get the result. You always have to go through another phase called compilation, where it is going to actually do some process in the backend where it generates a binary file which is specific to that platform and all, right? And this is one type of language. There is another type of language like shell script, Python, Perl, Ruby. These are all come under different. So when you write a shell script, are you going to do any compilation? You write the script and say .sh, it will work. So this is another style of writing program or executing programming languages. So there are two types: Java, .NET, C. These are all come under compiled languages. Of course, again there are small differences, but these are all under compiled languages. Python, Ruby, shell scripting, Perl, PHP. These are all again under a different category. These are all called interpreted languages, where you write the code and then you can start executing. You have a text file where you have all written the code. You can directly execute the same script. There is no separate again binary gets generated. You don't need to go through the compilation phase, right? So when you have the application developed in Java.NET, so there is a build process where you are actually going to compile that and then generate the artifacts like var file or AR file. Sometimes you will also have package. If you take Python and Ruby, you do not have compilation phase, but you will just pack them into a kind of zip file or something. So if it is Java, so the process build again has multiple steps. But if it is Python or Ruby, it's just packaging. So usually when it comes to any application, not one file, you might have a lot of Python files or PHP files. You'll put them together and then you will package it to different environment when you want to copy the or set up the application in a different environment. Okay. And once you put this into QA server, so you have to take the code from the developer, and then you will package it, and then you have the code ready. So you need another server for QA because we cannot use the same developer server. Okay, so ideally there should be a separate environment, QA environment, and the QA engineer has to deploy the code into the dedicated server, and the code should work there. Right? So that is how we will make sure the things are working as expected. Right? So the QA engineer is going to copy the code. So typically again, for running your code, you need to set up the application platform also. So let's say if you have a Java application, you need Tomcat server to run the application. If it is a simple HTML code, you need at least a web server like Apache or Nginx. PHP, Apache plus PHP or Nginx plus PHP. For Python, Apache plus Python, I think it has Gunicorn. Gunicorn is the web server for running Python applications. So depending on the platform, Again, we have to set up a server. On the QA server, we should have like CentOS, Apache Web Server, PHP, whatever is required should be running, configured and running. Okay, and then QA guys will copy the code into QA server, and then they will start the functionality testing. Then they will open the URL, so they will just start working. Okay, put your username and password, either it is working or not. When they put a wrong username and password, it should give a like error message, invalid login, username and password. So these are all their test cases. They will go through all the functionality testing. Okay, and if the application is working as expected, that's good. They'll move it on to the next environment. It could be a pre-production or production. Okay, if there are any issues, they'll report back to developer. Hey, there is a bug. Something is not working as expected. So typically we follow a ticketing mechanism. So Jira is a very popular ticketing tool. So where QA guys can just report that issue into Jira ticketing tool. So that request goes to developer. So he will be able to see, okay, what is actually happening. If the build is failed, so the developer will come to know, okay, what is the failed, what is the error message, etc., etc. So that it will help him to fix that again issue. Okay, so that is these are all done in QA phase. Okay, and you have another team, ops. So typically production support, operations team. So we call it different names, where these guys are responsible for building servers. So remember I was talking about setting up a QA server. So typically you have a support team who will take care of all these operations, setting up a Tomcat server to run the platform application. Okay, and deployments. So if it is QA environment, so typically QA will have access to that. Okay, development and QA will be owned by the development team. So they will have access to both teams will have access to both environments typically, or development team will have access to development environment, QA will have access to QA environment. But when it comes to pre-production and production, QAs will not have access to pre-production and production. So there is a dedicated team because the production operations are again separate. So QA responsibility is to test the application. So they don't know what are all should be done in the pre-production and production. So there is a dedicated team who is responsible for managing these two environments, pre-production and production, ops team. So whenever the QA build is successful, the QA will send a request to ops team. Hey, our build is working in QA, and this is the build information. You have the files here, and this is where to you deploy in the pre-production environment. So these guys will share all the instructions to deploy the latest build on the pre-production environment. And then so they will go through the deployment process. Again, if it is working, again they will send another production request. Hey, this is working in pre-production also. Move it to production. So that is how the code is moved to production environment. But different people are actually involved. Okay. So once the code is moved to production, again the ops team responsibility is to keep monitoring. Since we have released the new code, sometimes what happens after some time you push the new code, but it starts, maybe initially it works, but after that after some time it starts breaking because of different issues. It will start breaking. You will start seeing a lot of errors, or because of that your application CPU utilization goes up, memory utilization goes up. It happens because of some of the problems in the development stage. Okay, because developer doesn't know everything, so he'll develop the code with some of the best practices. And when we look at scenarios like how many of you know the performance testing process? No idea. So we'll definitely see some issues because we cannot think from all the different directions. Maybe one or two is possible, right? But when you move your code to application or application to production environment, then again you'll start seeing different errors based on different context. So again we'll have to fix those. So that is where the monitoring is also very, very important. Okay, so these are the main responsibilities of your operations team. Again, apart from this, operations team will also be responsible for backing up all your data, frequently to a certain location. Remember the EBS snapshots, AWS, right? So these are all some of the responsibilities of your ops. Okay, So here there are 3 teams involved, okay, and if you look at the current trend, so a lot of people actually do most of the things manually, or they are actually using some tools, but the handover, let's say, so okay, I'll look at some of the. I'll show you some more examples. Okay, so let us look at some of the challenges in the whole process. So, for example, the developers will keep pushing new code to the version control. So every small change in the development needs complete application testing in the QA environment. Because sometimes what happens, even if you make a small change in one place, that will impact the application functionality somewhere else. It can happen. If there is a link, it can happen. So every small change, first of all, they'll make sure that module is working. If it is working, the next step is to again do a full round of application testing to make sure nothing is broken. Okay, and from the operation side, the provisioning these infrastructure components like creating the servers, setting up web server, application servers. Sometimes we have only 1 or 2 servers in the production environment, but sometimes it can also go to 20, 30, 40, hundreds of servers also, depending on the product size that you are building. So if you want to build all of these servers manually, that becomes a very tedious job. So that is where we have to look at some of the automation options like CloudFormation, auto scaling groups, right? So we have to use some of these concepts to automate your processes. And monitoring is again a big challenge. So we need to monitor, we need to automate some of these processes. Okay, so why DevOps? So how the DevOps is going to help us here? So let us look at why should we need this here. So this will help you to automate certain things, the build process. So if you look at the overall process now, every time a developer pushes the code to version control, so typically a QA team guy will take the code manually and he will put it in some test server where he has to build that. So typically, they use, if it is Java application as an example, for building the code, there are 2 tools, Ant and Maven. So Maven is also like a script. So typically that is again given by your developer. So they will give you Maven script. So they have to execute, once the code is downloaded, they have to execute that Maven script. So which will again download all the build dependencies, and then finally it will compile the Java code, and finally it will prepare a WAR file and some of the artifacts, whatever you need to deploy in QA server. Okay, so these again artifacts have to be copied to the QA server manually. Okay, and then once you copy these to QA server, sometimes you might have to restart your Tomcat server, and then once you restart, then your QA environment is ready for testing. Then they will go to they will pick the URL for the QA server, put it in browser, and then do all the functionality testing. So there are multiple things here. So certain things are actually again can be automated. For example, have you heard about Selenium? Selenium, which is an automation tool for the functionality testing. So here, this tool will help you to open a browser and then mimic the click stream. Say, for example, if you go to any e-commerce application like Amazon, Flipkart. So if you want to test, if you just imagine you are the QA team for this application, let's say Flipkart. So if you want to check the Flipkart site is working as expected, what are all you can do? So typically what people are trying to do should be working as expected. So what people do? They'll first look at the products, fetch the product, go to product description, then add it to cart if they want to like it, then go to shopping cart, check out, make the payment, then log out. So this is a simple workflow. So if you want to make sure, and this is the workflow most of the people will go for. So if this is working, at least 80 to 90% of the Flipkart application is functionality is working. Maybe there could be some other pages, even if they are breaking, which is fine. But most of the users would be doing this transaction. searching for a product, selecting a product, look at the product description, add it to shopping cart, then go to shopping cart and then proceed to checkout, add your details and then make payment and then finally log out, right? So if you use Selenium, this entire click stream can be automated. So you can actually record this click stream and then you should be able to use Selenium automation tool. So what happens when you run a Selenium script? It opens up the browser, it will search for the product that you have given. In the script you can ask, let's say Samsung some phone, some mobile. So it will search for that product. If it is available, it will pick the first product and then it will add it to shopping cart, go to shopping cart. So it does all the whatever. It's like a virtual user. When you sit and do some transaction, wherever you click, your Selenium tool will help you to mimic that workflow, click stream. So with that, instead of we doing everything manually, so you are automating some piece. Okay, but copying the code, let's say if you have used Maven to build, again copying the code is manually. Tomcat again has to be restarted, right? So there are certain things. So there are people who does end-to-end automation, so which means they are already in DevOps. There are certain people who are doing automation bits and pieces. Let's say they're actually using Selenium. They're using Selenium, but downloading the code, building Maven, copying the artifacts is again done manually. All right. So if you look at the overall process now, there are already people using bits and pieces, with some manual intervention. Then some of the things are automated. So our intention is to move everything to automated model. So there are again different tools which will help us to hook these pieces. So if there are multiple processes, so we can actually use another tool to hook these two processes. Okay, I'll show you some of the examples also going forward. Okay, and you can automate testing. So testing again by using Selenium, and you can also release. So again, release and deployment can be automated by our Chef, Ansible, or some of the tools. Okay, deployments, and Jenkins also will help you to release your artifacts to the next environment. All right. So this is from the development side or QA side, and to automate, we can also use this for the automating your operational activities. What the operations guys are doing, creating servers, okay, and installing the software. So as I said, we have to install the platform to run any of your application types like Java, .NET, anything. You need to install Java, then Tomcat, then you fine tune your Tomcat properties, right? So you can actually automate this by using Ansible or Chef or Puppet. And you can also deploy your application code automatically to the servers. And also enabling monitoring, backup, all of these can be automated. Okay. Okay, so what is DevOps all about? So we want to use this for automation. Okay, and so if you look at this, so DevOps actually talks about the three things. One is continuous integration. So here, look at from the development side. So typically you have a development team, not one member. So usually, if 3-4 members or even more than that, in the development team. So what happens? They might be simultaneously working on different modules. Everybody working on their own module, right? And finally, when it comes to release, when they want to move the code to QA, everybody has to check in their code. Then finally, we'll get the product, maybe version 1.0, right? So what happens sometimes? Once they push the code to version control, one guy will start breaking the functionality of other guys. So accidentally, they might be working on the same files, or one might be working on a same file where the other guy is also working on that file. So finally, when it has to merge, the functionality will change. It can happen. So this is like a continuous process, right? So every day they will be developing some code and they want to check this. So if you cannot automate this, running these integration test cases, like where once they code is developed, pushed into version control. So typically we run some kind of integration test cases. At least we have to make sure the build is not failed. So what happens? A lot of times the build fails, like when you when the developer pushes the code, okay, and then they merge the code because of some changes, the build will also fail. The basic thing, right? So without build, we cannot move forward to other testing. Testing and release cannot be done. But if this is a continuous process, if you do not automate this, so the QA time will QA team has to spend a lot of time in building this. So every time the developer checks in, so there should be a guy who will be building. So we don't want that, right? So we want to automate the workflow so that when the developer checks in the code, automatically the build will be triggered. Okay. And continuous delivery is, so once the build is done, so it has to be moved to QA environment, and we should be able to execute some Selenium scripts for functionality testing, and we can also push it to the production environment. So once the things are moving as expected, move it to QA. Things are working as expected, move it to pre-production. Again, if there is also working, move it to production. If the functionality is broken anywhere, if it is not, things are not working as expected, report the problem back to the developer. So again, that guy will fix the bug, again pushes the new code to the version control. Okay, and the other one is also called infrastructure as code or configuration management, where this will help us to build the servers from code, from scripts. Okay, have you seen AWS CLI? How we can build the server, how to create a virtual machine, how to create a database, everything from command line. CloudFormation template. So can you use the CloudFormation template to build the server, creating a server? And can you also pass user data to configure the software on the server? So once you execute the CloudFormation template, the entire server is built. So remember, there are two steps in the build part. So one is bringing up your OS, at least OS, and then maybe, I don't know, minimum components, and then making sure your platform is also configured. So it is not just OS, you also have to make sure the software required to run your application also should be configured. Whether you do it in two steps or in one step is up to you. So if you can do it in one step, we are like in a full automation model. Otherwise, if you create the server and log into the server and then installing software manually with commands, you are spending again good amount of manual effort, which is not required, right? So we can actually use CloudFormation template which creates the server. Can we pass the user data? If we have a script, can we pass it on to user data? So with one CloudFormation template, once you kick off that, your server is created and your platform is also set up, right? So that is how we have to look. So this will help you to run your server from code. So CloudFormation template is a simple script. So typically the biggest problem, let me give you some live challenges in real-time cases. So typically when you go to any companies, like most of the current MNCs, the way they work is, let's say, okay, they have a customer who is coming up with a product. Okay, so typically there are three main phases when it comes to the application, like converting the idea to production. Okay, so once the customer comes to anybody, first of all, the requirement analysis, you remember that phase, so that there people will actually come with an architecture. Okay, so I think I can show you some example. Okay, I'll show you some example. I have an architecture diagram also. How does it look basically? So where we decide the language, decide the framework, where we decide the database, etc., etc. Apart from that, we'll also come up with the server architecture. So where we have a load balancer, backend web servers, database with multi-availability zone for RDS, and we have a Route 53, CloudWatch for monitoring, etc., etc. So this is the architecture of your application, right? So this is the first step which should happen ideally. So how the application should be there in production environment. Okay, what are all is required. Okay, So this is the architect part. During the requirement analysis, this is what it should happen, and then it goes to the development. Okay, and after the development, or so typically, the development team will keep working on the development part, and your operations team will also start working on building the servers. So maybe they might be working on the cloud formation template, user data script. So do you understand who will be like working where? So development will start from the development team. They'll start working on the application functionality, the code, and operations team, they will be working on the building the infrastructure. They have to keep the cloud formation templates ready. So if you want to build multiple servers within auto scaling, Route 53, etc., we can put all of those cloud formation in a cloud formation template, and we have to keep the things ready. So once you create the cloud formation template, entire application component should be created. Okay. So this is called build phase from the operations side. You are building the infrastructure for the application hosting. Okay. So now let's say, imagine, okay, your development team has finished the first version. They have given some functionality, passed in QA, and then finally it sits in production environment. Okay. So once the first version is running as expected, and it is live, which means it is given to the customers. So typically, the build team is going to hand over the environment to operations team. So there are three teams: architect team, build team, and operations team or support team. Okay, so the support team will be like making any small changes. Like so, as I said, the development will be an ongoing process. You will keep getting the latest versions. So operations team will make sure they deploy the latest code onto the pre-production and production servers. Whether it is manually or automated is a different story. But the operations team is responsible for pushing the latest code to pre-production and production environments, monitoring, backup, etc., etc. Okay. So over the time, what happens? Like there are two teams who has built the environment, who is supporting the environment. So ideally, we should have a strong document which explains what are all we have done in the build, and then we can hand it over to the operations. Otherwise, how do I know? Somebody has built a server and then he gave me the access. So if someone gives you their laptop access, do you know what are all they have configured easily? Unless you go to the control panel, programs and features, you don't know what are all he has configured. So you have to go to different places and then pick what are all he has done. Otherwise, you don't know. Or imagine if they have a script, like what we passed in user data, a shell script or whatever, which was used to build that server. So they just executed the script and then the server was completely configured. They have installed the Apache web server, started the service, installed Git, then let's say downloaded the code from Git repository, and then the server is ready. So they have done all of this from a script. So do you need to even log into the server to see how the server was configured? If you have the access to that script, you can open the script. Like if you have the cloud formation template with that user data, you can see what is there in user data. Oh, so just by looking at user data, you can tell, okay, somebody has installed HTTPD, service is started. They also installed Git. Okay, the code is downloaded to www.html folder. That's it. That is what they have done. So do you understand what is the difference? So if you have a script which is used to build that server, you don't need to even log into the server to see how the server was configured. By looking at the script, you can tell, right? And the script is again helpful to build similar servers. Even if you want to build tomorrow 100 servers like the existing one, right? So if you don't know the configuration, imagine if you don't have that script and you need to build 100 servers. Just imagine your situation. See, remember, the reason I am saying is, it is not like the 4 steps that I am saying. When you actually go to production environment, you might have to execute 40-50 steps, because you have to set up different software. You have to create users. You have to fine tune the SSH, disabling root. Remember, SSH, you disable the root access, and then NTP, managing NTP to make sure The servers are always up to date with the network time, internet time. Okay, and then you have to install monitoring agent. Okay, and then you have to install the Tomcat or Apache web servers. Again, we have just installed, but after that, again we have to sometimes fine tune, add a lot of Apache modules. There are a lot of Apache modules. SSL module, have you used any of those? SSL module, there are different modules. So in production, again, we might be using some of these modules. So overall, your build process becomes like a 40-50 step process. So if you don't know how these were done, at the build team, and if you got the responsibility to clone another server, build another server, you're gone. It's very, very difficult process, because even if you put any effort, okay, if that guy has installed Apache and then he has gone to some file and then to fine tune some parameter, how do you know? So without proper tools, it's very, very difficult to see what are all are modified on the server. So that is where the configuration management will help you a lot. So we actually write the scripts to see how the server should be configured. So we'll just write a kind of policy. Okay, this is how the server should be configured. We'll write all the scripts, and then we push the scripts to the server. We are not going to make any changes manually, because if you make the changes manually, again they will not reflect in the script. So even if you want to update anything, update your script, push it to the server. Got it? So that is how you are going to keep the server configuration up to date, and this has got a lot of advantages, as I said. So one is you will have the complete visibility, what are all you are running on the server. This will also help you to build other servers, and this not only for building up servers for the same application, you can use it for other applications also. Let's say if you are getting another Java application, the Tomcat installation process may be same, and okay, we have to create few users, we have to use NTP, we have to disable SSH. All these things should be applicable for any production servers. So we should be able to reuse the scripts for other setups. So it has got good advantages. So that is where we have to use this again, infrastructure as code or configuration management. Okay, so these are like details. So how the process will look like once you implement the DevOps, after implementation. So this is like again the same SDLC process I was showing. So look at this. You will have the business requirement here. The business owner comes with the requirement. Okay, and then you have the development team who will be developing the code, and then they will push the code to the version control. So they might be using either Git, SVN, CVS, etc. So there are a lot of options. So in when it comes to the tools, again in DevOps, there are different options. So we can actually use any tools. Okay, it is not mandatory to we have to use the same tool. So imagine the development team is pushing the code to version control. So what we can do is, again, we can actually use some tools like Jenkins. Okay, so this tool will identify when there is a new release on the version control. If someone pushes the new code, it can identify, hey, there is a change on the version control. So it will download the latest code. It will use the Maven script to build the artifacts. It can also copy the artifacts to QA server, and it can restart the services, and it can keep the application ready on the QA environment. Okay, or it can also use some modules, or it can also use Chef or Puppet, Ansible to set up QA server. Imagine QA server is not there. You can write a script. So do you know? I think we have not. Okay, so you know how to create the server on AWS by using AWS CLI. Okay, so you can configure the AWS CLI on Jenkins server. So what happens? Then QA server is not there now. So once the development team pushes the new code, Jenkins can actually trigger that AWS CLI, which creates the server on demand. Whenever you want to test it, it creates the server on demand on AWS. Okay, and it can deploy the latest code, and then it can actually execute some scripts. Imagine, okay, the testing is also successful. Then it can terminate the server immediately. So what is the advantage of this again? Cost optimization. So if you have a QA environment on cloud, you are not using the servers every time. It is not in use 24/7. So when there is a new version of your code, you are creating a QA server, and then deploying the latest code, testing everything, and then you can also terminate the server, right? And then this will help you to build the code, test the code, and then you can use Puppet or Chef or Ansible to deploy your code to servers. So there are different ways you can do it. Okay, and finally, all these servers are monitored from your dashboard by using different tools. Okay, so if you look at this, the manual process is only till here. Once the development team pushes the code to version control, that's it. The rest of the things, everything like build, test, deployment, monitoring processes can be automated by using DevOps. Okay, because this cannot be automated, right? So if at all we want an application, that cannot be automated. So we should have a development team, so their jobs are safe. Okay, so if you have multiple teams here, so this is going to happen actually. So if you have ops team who is deploying the changes manually, who are in manual testing, all of those roles will be gone. So it is like not like gone, they have to, so it is gone when you do not think about automation. So we have to change our roles or our skill set also according to the requirement. So if you are doing manually now, and if you say no, I want to do it manually, then you're gone. So we have to learn these tools, how to use these tools, how to build the automation. Okay, so we should think about automating the things, because most of these things are like kind of repeated steps. If you look at the QA job, it's actually repeated stuff. So they will actually first build all the test cases, and their job is to, every time there is a new build, take the latest code, and then just perform this test. Go and click here, click here, click here. If you click this, this is what you have to see. That's it. So when you have a repeated process, that can be automated. That is where the Selenium has come, right? So you can actually do that. Instead of having a person, you can have a robot now. So Selenium is your robot tool, which will help you to do the functionality testing. Why do you need a person? Especially when you have a person, he will be tired. He needs a cup of coffee or tea. He needs appraisal. He needs increments, right? But if you give it to robo, so it does whatever the workload it gives. And even if you have a person, he works only for 9 hours. But Selenium can run 24/7. No need of increments, and it is also open source. So you don't need to buy that robo. It is free. All right. So that is where the enterprises are getting advantage. So now some of these people or the roles are now being replaced by the tools. Okay. So that is where we have to know how do we operate these tools to come up with this kind of end-to-end automation model. Okay. So when it comes to the DevOps, so overall, so we do not have any specific tools to be used. Okay, but I will talk about the tools. But that's a quick introduction to DevOps. So any questions? As of now?
Satish, Gautam here.
Yes, Gautam.
Okay, one question here, like when you say DevOps, it's involved in both ways, like development side and operation side, right? So do we really need to do any development activities at all, or whatever we are going to learn in these, actually it's on operations side?
That's a good question. So the question is here: do we so since it is going to spread across two different areas, Dev and Ops, DevOps. So should we need any development knowledge? See, over the time, what happens? We are actually looking at the operations which are happening at development side, and the operations side, and then we are trying to automate this. So that is the DevOps role. Okay. So here, when you are trying to automate, we will be again developing some scripts. So that is where you should have little bit of programming knowledge. So the basic programming knowledge is required. Again, it depends on the tools. So sometimes, if you go to a specific tool, it might need basic programming language. If you pick another tool, let's say for example, you have, when it comes to configuration management, you have Ansible, Puppet, Chef in configuration management. These three tools does more or less the same job. Okay. So if you want to get expertise in Ansible, Ansible is written for system administrators. They are keeping system administrators in mind who will be automating their job, operations job, the installation, provisioning, and all of that. So if you are concentrating more on Ansible, you don't need to be a developer. Not required. So basic programming knowledge is also not required. Not much at least. Okay. But if you pick Chef for the same job, instead of Ansible, you are picking Chef. But when you are using Chef, it actually expects you to have basic programming knowledge. Because if you want to write Chef scripts, you should know the basic Ruby. So that is how that tool is designed for. So Chef, if you know the programming knowledge, writing Chef scripts is very easy. Or it will be little difficult. So that is where I was saying I will cover basic Ruby also. So then only you will be able to understand Chef. But for Ansible, you don't need to have any programming knowledge. But remember, we are actually trying to be like a programmer, but the development, the application development is very, very different from what we are doing. So there, the development team should know how do we build the applications, like writing the code Java, the Java application code. And they might be using some MVC framework like Spring, Struts, etc., etc. If they want to connect to store anything in the database, they should know how to use the database for storing the data. So that's a different, completely development side. Okay. So we are also will be developing some scripts, but the technologies what we will be using is completely different. But yes, you should have a little bit of programming knowledge to get into DevOps. You have to start with basics, and it's always good to go to at least intermediate level. Okay. So keep up, if you are not from programming, or if you have not yet started, just start learning the ABCs of programming. So basic at least if conditions, loops and all, and then definitely loops concepts will also help you. All right.
I have another question. This is Dilip.
Yeah, Dilip.
So how much of testing knowledge do we need to have to run these automated testing?
Okay, that's a good question. So how much testing knowledge should we need to have to become a DevOps engineer? Okay. So remember, one person cannot do everything. Okay. So that's the first thing we need to remember. Okay. So imagine if you are trying to, what I said, once you have the application code in version control, we want to automate the rest of the things. Okay. So look at the tools, what are all we are using there. To download the code, we use Jenkins to download and then get the latest changes. Jenkins. To build the code, we can use either Ant, Maven. Okay. Okay. Let me summarize this. I'm sure all of you might have these questions. Okay. Jenkins. Then for building the code, we are either using Ant or Maven. Okay. Okay. And once we build it, we can actually run some test cases, unit testing, by using different unit testing framework. Okay. That is either if it is Java application code, we can either JUnit or I think there are other frameworks also. So let us go with say JUnit. Okay. And then it comes to the deployments. you have to copy the code to deployments. So for configuring the servers and then deploying the code, you can either use Chef, Puppet, Ansible. Okay. Chef, Puppet, Ansible. Okay. Then for the functionality testing, we have Selenium. Okay. And then once the application testing is done, okay, then you can actually, if there is any bug, you can send it back to Jira or some tracking bug tracker tool. So let us go with Jira. Okay. Then once your functionality testing is done, there are also a lot of other tools which will help you to test your code quality, how the code is written, if they have written with the best practices or not. So for example is SonarQube. Okay. And once this is also done, there is a tool called QTP or UFT, you might have heard this, to test your performance of the application. So how the application will behave when 100 users access the application, how it behaves 200 for 200 users, 500 users, how does it behave? So this is called performance testing. Again for this you have QTP or UFT. Okay, and then the next phase comes vulnerability assessment. So there are some tools again for checking your code if there are any vulnerables. So sometimes what happens if you are using a library which has got some vulnerabilities, so you are potentially risking at your application. So there is a chance that people can hack into your application. Again, there are certain tools. So I don't remember the name of the tool. So forget about it. Okay, QTP and UFT. What else you have? Okay, next comes to the monitoring. So next, again we have, when it comes to monitoring, we have Nagios, Zabbix, and popular server monitoring tools. Okay, and then there are also tools called for analytics, application performance analytics, or for server analytics, which are like Splunk, Elk Stack, Sumo Logic. So these are just a few, and in fact there are a lot of tools. So these are all for performance analytics. And okay, so I'll stop here. So this is the list of the tools, as of my knowledge, what you can use in DevOps. So how many tools do you want to learn? Okay, let me tell you the other story also. If you want to learn Ant or Maven, if you want to be in a position to write your scripts for Ant or Maven, you should know Java, core Java at least, which is again a 3 months program. Same case for Selenium also. For Selenium, these two. So now do you want to learn Java also? So remember one thing, we cannot do everything. Okay, so we should always have a specialization. Okay, and if you know how things work on the other side, that's going to be a very good advantage. So remember, we have to be working as part of a team. We cannot, I cannot be alone, in a team. I'm not the whole team. I'm just part of a team. All right. So we should always have expertise in one area. Okay. So that is the reason, if you look at any of the other DevOps training institutes, they might be like mentioning like Maven, Perforce, where they focus more on from the QA side, build and QA build test side. But our main focus is towards the configuration management. So do you understand the difference now? Right? So our main focus is, that is the reason we have trained you on Linux, and then from AWS, and then DevOps. Okay, so where you need to know how to create the servers, and in fact if you want to deploy the applications on AWS, you should be in a position to create the servers on AWS, apply the scripts, and then should be able to copy the code to AWS servers. Okay, so remember, we cannot learn everything, so we'll focus on certain areas. Okay, and then I'll give you like overall like view how you can integrate. Okay, so that is what we will be learning in next classes. All right, Dilip, so does it answer your question? Okay, cool.
So what are the main things that we are going to cover in this training?
Yes.
Is that only configuration management or also something like Jenkins?
Yes, sure, Prasanna. I will give you the list of tools that we will be covering now. Okay.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
first we'll start with Git, and then we'll go with Ansible and Chef actually for configuration management. We look at both these. These are very important because there are fundamental differences in Ansible versus Chef. Chef and Puppet both work in very similar way. Okay, so that is the reason I'm not covering Puppet. Okay, and so Chef actually needs a Ruby, basic Ruby. Okay, so first we'll go with Ansible, where you don't need any programming language. Then we'll go to Ruby and then Chef, and then we'll also go to Jenkins. We'll also talk about Jenkins. So I'll show you, I'll take a sample Maven script. I'm not going to build it, and I'm not expecting you also to build it. So our assumption is, so whoever has that knowledge to create the Maven script will create it and we'll give it else. So I will use that, and I'll show you how to build the code, creating the artifacts, creating the var files or whatever, and then how do we copy this to the QA server. Okay, and then we'll also see Docker, how to create virtual containers. Okay, so for running some task like let's say the same build can be also again done by using Docker. So for again Jenkins, we should either have to use a separate virtual machine for building, so or we can also run the script on the Jenkins server, but we don't want to do that because Jenkins is just a kind of centralized server, and we don't want again anything else to happen on Jenkins server. So when it has to build the code, it can create a virtual machine where Maven will be installed. It will download the code and then finally it has to build. So for that, we can either use a virtual machine or a Docker container. So Docker containers are like kind of replacement for virtual machines. So it has got some more advantages over your virtual machines. So we'll talk about Docker also. So these are the main 6 tools that we will be focusing more upon. Okay, and I'll also, I don't know how many. Yes, guys. Okay, so I don't know if the monitoring was covered in the Linux administration classes, but I'm going to cover the monitoring. So what are the different types of monitoring? Okay, server monitoring, application performance monitoring, URL monitoring, then what is that? Synthetic transactions monitoring, all of that. There are different ways of monitoring. And then we'll also talk about some of the tools like New Relic. New Relic is again a very, very popular tool in the monitoring, and it has got a lot of advantages. Okay, so I'll show you how to get started with New Relic. All right, so this can be replaced with any tool. If you want to use like Nagios, Zabbix, whatever you want, you can actually replace that.
Also, I have another question.
Yes, Gautam.
So this is Philip. So this what is the timeline for this course? Now, how many weeks is left out?
3 weeks. So we are just starting today, and
Okay,
we'll continue the same way, like we have run the AWS sessions. Same like
Okay.
3-4 days, maybe including we'll have also weekend sessions. Hope you have seen my email, right? So we have a scheduled Ansible session this weekend. So we want to cover the Ansible. Actually, Ansible takes approximately 5 to 6 hours. So we want to cover this weekend Ansible, fully weekend. Okay, Ansible.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, so that's where we'll start. So any questions? Okay, so how many of you are actually comfortable with AWS? Where is that? Comfortable? Guys, we have actually openings and we have our some internal project requirement. So if you are comfortable, don't sit idle. Just come and participate in those projects. So that is how you will learn. If you just come and practice, and then if you keep your knowledge within you, you will never be able to explore the things. Right? So come and talk to me after the training session. So we have actually some requirements. So we got some projects also. So I'll show you at least, even if I don't get you into the project, I'll give you the project requirement. You can start building the project on your account. So you will at least know how do we build, right? So that gives you experience, real-time experience, so whenever you go to any interviews, you should be able to answer. All right. Okay. So any questions? So if you don't have any questions, just give me a 5-minute break. So once we come back, I'll give you introduction to Git. We'll start with Git. So we'll see the advantages. What is Git? What is the version control system? What are the advantages of it? How do we at least start using Git? Okay. And tomorrow will be Git is a small topic. We don't want to get into deep. Git is actually it's a vast topic, but we don't want we are not actually a release engineer. Okay. So I'll give you how to use Git, how to use GitHub. Okay, all of that. Guys, I'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, guys, we are back. Okay, so let's start with Git. So we'll talk about Git. What is Git, and then what are the advantages and all. So Git is said to be a distributed version control system. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you are new to this term, version control system. So let us talk about this. What is version control? So anybody knows what is a version control system? What are the advantages? Okay. So simply, it gives you a time machine for going back to earlier versions. So that's called version control. So as an example, let's say you have your resumes, right? And you keep updating those. So once you update your resume, so is there a way you can see the old version? How does it look? How do you, let's say you modified something, and then you wanted a previous version. Maybe you deleted something, some important lines. Then you wanted the previous version. So how do you recover those? Is there a way? No, you don't have a way. So in a traditional system, it is not possible, right? So that is where we have to use some additional software called version control. Because if you look at the life of a developer, they will be working on a lot of text files, and they'll keep modifying the files, right? And they will also keep releasing new versions. So today we have, let's say, version 1 in production environment, and tomorrow we have released, let's say, 1.1. And if there is a version, if there is a problem with 1.1, so what we will do? So typically we have to go back to 1.0. So if there is any version, do we want to keep that in production environment? We always go back to the previous version. So that is what we do, right? So how do we manage all these versions? So that is by using a version control system. So when you have a version control system, so it will help you to go back to see what was the previous version of your file. Okay. So, and it will also give you a great support for different versions of the same project. Okay, like you can create a list, you can create a list of files as part of a project, and you can just give a kind of tag or something, a version number, okay, for multiple files. So whenever you want to see the project version 1.0 version, you can switch to there, and then you can see that. And if you want to switch to again version 1.1, so you should be able to switch that. So I'll show you some examples how to do this. And it also simplifies your concurrent work and merging changes, especially when you have a development team. They all will be pushing the code to version control. So this will help you to merge the code. As I said, sometimes what happens, people are working on the same file. So this guy has a copy and another guy has a different copy. So this will help you to merge the code, and it prepares the required version, a final copy. Okay. Okay, so what are the different version control systems options? So there are different options like you know, if you pick like application servers, you have Tomcat, JBoss, WebLogic. Similarly, version controls, again you have different options here: CVS, Subversion, Mercurial, and Git. So these are popular version control systems. I think mostly all these are open source version control systems. And there are also some enterprise products like Perforce, then ClearCase, IBM ClearCase. These are like enterprise products which come with additional license. Okay, and TFS also is a version control system, Microsoft. Okay, so here CVS and Subversion both work in one way. Mercurial and Git work in a different way. Okay, so I'll talk about what are the differences between this. So when you have Git, let us look at what are the advantages. It has support for branching and merging. It is very small and fast. So it follows a distributed mechanism. It gives you complete data assurance. It also has a staging area which will help you to make some temporary commits. Okay, and it is free and open source. So these are the advantages of Git. Okay, so let us look at the fundamental differences of version control systems. So as I said, CVS and Subversion follow one mechanism called centralized version control. That they both are centralized version control systems, whereas Mercurial and Git both are distributed version control systems. Okay, so the difference comes here. So in CVS and Subversion, there is a dedicated server. There is a dedicated server, okay, and you have the clients, and they are all connected to your client with an agent. So are you using Dropbox, Google Drive? So imagine, okay, Dropbox has a server where your data will be saved onto, and you have the Dropbox software installed on your laptops or desktops, right? And every time you upload a file to your Dropbox folder, it automatically gets synced. But here, when you are using version control, you have to commit that to the server. So it is not automatically synchronized. Okay. So whenever you create a file, you have to add it to your centralized server, and then you have to run few commands like svn commit, svn check-in, something like that. Okay. So then the file will be added to your centralized server, and the versions can be tracked from then onwards. Okay, once you track the file to a centralized server and you make any changes, so it will be able to show the difference. Okay, what was the previous version of file and what is the current version. So what are the lines you have added, where exactly you have changed. It will start displaying that information. Okay, and the way it works is basically all those changes, so typically when it is saving the difference of the versions, so it uses a small database, not a MySQL database, it is a file level database. So all those changes are actually saved on your centralized server. So if you want to check the difference between the current version and the latest version, you always have to send a command to your server. Okay, so then it will connect to the server, check the difference, and then the result is passed back to the client here. So it will be, you will be able to see the difference. For a moment, for example, let's imagine your centralized server is down because of some network connectivity or some hardware failure. So if the server is not available, you will not be able to check the difference. You always have the latest copy on your desktop. So if you want to now go back to the previous version, if you want to check the previous version, what was the previous version, you cannot do that without connecting to the centralized server. All right. So if because of any changes, imagine, okay, your centralized server is corrupted. It means entire your changes are gone. So you should always have a backup. All right. So that is how the centralized version control systems work. That is how they have designed. All right. And they have got some disadvantages. As I said, all your clients should be always connected to the centralized server to check the differences, and then for finding any versions information, etc. So that becomes a limitation with centralized version control system. Whereas when you go to distributed version control systems, imagine this, if this is a workstation or laptop or desktop. So it has got its own database on every workstation. Okay, so if you have another set of developers, everybody will have their own local database. Okay, so all the tracking is done locally. So you don't need a dedicated server there. Okay, but so when you have these like individual developers, it becomes a tedious job, because if I'm a developer, I want to share the code with my teammate, because sometimes I have dependency on the others and they have dependency on me. So we should be able to exchange the code. So without a server, exchanging code becomes a very, very difficult thing. So that is where we will put a remote server. But otherwise, in Git, the remote server is not mandatory. So without remote server, you can track all the changes on your local machine. You should be able to share the code also with others. Okay. So it is like all these servers will be same when you are using Git distributed version control systems. So everybody has their complete history of the changes. So even if the remote server is gone, even if you do not have the connectivity, you can still check the difference. What is the difference between previous copy and my current copy? Okay. Okay. So the way it works is, so when we say distributed version control system, everyone has the complete history. You don't need to connect to the centralized server every time. And everything is done offline, and everything is done offline, which means you don't need to have the connectivity to the server always. Only whenever you want to share the code with others, then you want to push the code to server, or if somebody has pushed the code, you can pull the code from server. So only for push and pull, you should have connectivity to the server. So there is no centralized authority. That is the remote server is just by a convention, but otherwise it does not have. But nowadays, the centralized servers, instead of going for our own servers, we have like GitHub solutions, which is called a SaaS solution, and they have got a lot of advantages. Now they give us some automation options for DevOps. So we'll talk about this. So here the changes can also be shared without a server when you are using Git. Okay. So the next step is I'll show you how to install the Git. So it's pretty simple. On Red Hat CentOS machines, you say install Git. That is available in the default repositories. So just say install Git, it will install. If you are on Ubuntu, apt-get install Git. Okay, so once you install the Git, it gives you a command Git. Okay, so you can say Git space help if you want to find the usage, how to use Git. Okay, and the first and foremost important thing is you have to introduce yourself to Git. So which means, so you are part of a team. So every time you make some changes, Git has to track who has done these changes, right? So for that, we use this command where we can write some our name, the developer's name like this: git config -- global user.name Satish, and we can also give our email like this.
So the Git package will be already available in Red Hat because we are giving yum install Git.
Yeah, by default it is available in the default repositories, Prathama. So just say yum install git, you should be able to install.
So by default, it will be available with Red Hat package.
Yeah, Red Hat packages also. Only thing is we need to make sure when you say Red Hat, you should have the subscription manager enabled, because since it is a licensed version. If you are able to install any other packages, I think you should be able to install Git also. Okay, so also remember here we are using an option here -- global. Okay, so which means if you have multiple projects on the same workstation, same machine, it will use the same details, same username and email. Okay, but for example, okay, this is my office laptop and I'm using my official email ID here. But there is also a personal project which I'm just working on, just for doing some R&D. This is not part of my office project, right? So then, so ideally you have to do this only once. But let's say if you want to use a different name and different email address for only one project, so then you can do this. So just create a directory, and you can say you can use this git config username without that -- global. So inside your project, so if this is your project directory, go to there and then just use this git config username and your username, and similarly you can give your email, personal email ID. So this is a repository specific changes, and these are the global changes. So these are project specific repository changes, and these are your global changes. So next is we have to create the repository and initialize that. So we'll discuss this tomorrow. I'll show you how to create the repository, how do we initialize that, and then how to add the code and then start tracking the changes, etc. Okay, we'll see the rest of the things tomorrow. So any questions as of now? Dilip, Gautam, Prasanna.
No, nothing from my side.
All right, sure. All right, guys. So we'll catch again tomorrow at the same time. All right. Sure. Thank you.